Four. How are you?
Good morning.
Somebody who's done all of the required reading before today.
That was that one guy.
Good to be
Hey, Dave.
Just because it was you.
Well, thank you. And so it was super interesting and not dry at all. Uh-huh.
As I said, most people don't know who I am. I like it that way.
Good morning, everyone. How are you?
All right, Counselor.
I'm doing well. I haven't led a committee meeting in a while. Yeah, so
You'll have
get
a few-
ready, right? It's coming.
We have a few
It's
next
coming.
month.
Well, we are here to talk about the citywide revale and the contract that's on the agenda with GAR. I have with me Councillor Hogan, Councillor Gathers, Councillor Paniagua, and our friends from Assessment. So, Commissioner, myself and Councillor Paniagua sat on the RFP committee. This is the vendor that we are part of the team that's selected. Do you want to give a high-level overview of the process, the contract, and I guess I'll just turn it over to you.
Great. So we can start with, this has been talked about for a very long time. I don't think,
Are the mics on? I
we
can't quite.
seem a little faint.
Yeah. Oh, yep, if you get right up there.
Go ahead.
We can handle this.
Oh.
There you go.
Councillor
Now we can
Gathers.
hear you.
Well done.
Craig did tell me. Dave, thanks for coming. Do you want to hang and we'll go to the bullpen as needed? Cool, thanks. This is Dave Barnett from GAR.
Great.
Oh, which committee members know, I guess. So the city's talked about a revale for a long time, and frankly has been a little ambivalent about this. A citywide revale hasn't been done since the mid-'90s. It's going to cost a significant amount of money for a department whose budget hovered under $500,000 for most of my tenure here, and certainly a heck of a lot of Ann's tenure here. And it's an investment that really we need to be institutionally prepared to protect, which arguably we weren't in 1997. We came out of a revale in the mid-'90s, and we held our level of assessment at 100%. The relationship between assessment and fair market value for 7 years suffered a little blip in the early teens after the recession, held it flat for another 4 years in a row. And then as market forces and assessments have sort of diverged, we've gotten to a point where the equalization rate has fallen like a stone. Per the state, our current level of assessment is 57.5%, with no signs that, even with historic assessment work by our staff, we can abate that. We've done 16,000 property reassessments out of 41,000 in the city in the last 2 years, and we've lost another 7 points off the E-grade. So that said, we put money into the budget last year to kick the tires on a reval. No surprise that we're going to be coming back with this year's budget, asking for more. And we began the RFP process plus or minus a year ago. Drafted an RFP with support, certainly from the state, leaning heavily on our peers in Buffalo, which is in many ways an analogous community about twice the size of ours, but who's gone through this process twice in the last decade. And the output was an RFP. We had a number of interviews, 3 serious respondents, and the RFP committee was convened. Thank you both for participating, reading, and offering salient feedback on what we were all doing. And the RFP committee, as you both know, decided to move forward with GAR. So we're coming forward to council to request entering into a contract with GAR for this citywide equity update, and looking for a not to exceed amount of, I believe, $1.8 million.
Can I ask, for our viewers at home, can you run through that same high-level overview minus a little bit of the jargon and
Oh,
terminology?
too jargony. This was okay, and yeah, bear with me because a lot of the jargon's probably above my head too. So in our day-to-day assessment work, I think everybody by and large understands how we do it. We are primarily in the field with our assessors, looking at properties. In the case of residential properties, looking at comparable neighborhood sales data, and reassessing properties at the neighborhood level. We'll go into a neighborhood 50 in Tipperary Hill, look at every residential property, look
It's
at the-
neighborhood number one, but it's okay.
in certain rankings, yes, it is. The west side is the best side. We look at the universe of sales comparables. We reassess every property within that neighborhood, and those are reflected on a tentative roll released on January 1st. The public have a chance to come in, contest those tentative assessments. I sign a final roll on March 31st, next Monday. We've done this for 30 years, since the last reval. We've done a lot of these in recent years, and yet we still fall behind. On a micro level, I think Councilor Hogan's got a pretty true number on his house, but citywide, 62 different neighborhoods, arguably, each of them is inequitably assessed in the context of one another. In a world in which property taxes are levied, think of a pie. Everybody who's overassessed is effectively carrying the weight in terms of property taxes for those who are underassessed. Each year we do more work, it feels like we're advancing the ball, but we're just exacerbating inequities that exist within the roll, and it's going to get worse every year. So we need a vendor to come in with the capacity to look at everybody in the same year at the same level of reassessment, collect data first off, make sure we're starting with the foundation of, do you have a 3-bedroom house, a 4-bedroom house? Is it 1,700 square feet, or do we have a 400-foot, finished attic or basement? Make sure that all of the inventory is as true as we believe it to be in our files. Uh-oh, no jargon. Getting out of the weeds.
I'll let you finish that statement, but I do have a question.
Sure.
In regards to data collection.
Oh, well, I was going to jump into modeling, which is getting to be out of my depth. So let's go with the data collection.
With that, what you said with the assessment and collecting data throughout the city to determine what house has what, how is the communication going to happen with houses that have been remodeled, updated this, updated that, the city did or did not have a permit or whatever the case may be, to make sure that the assessment of the house or the property is going to be evaluated to that degree, to the points that you've made?
This is where I'm so thrilled to have Dave Barnett from GAR here, so I can go to the bullpen and ask him to come to the podium, introduce himself, and get a little into the weeds there.
Thank you for having me. Dave Barnett, I'm one of the owners of GAR Associates.
Nice to meet you.
Your question's a good one. I just, without being too jargon with it, one of the complications is there's nothing mandating any municipality to carry their values at 100%. And there's nothing mandating any municipality, city, town, doesn't matter, to do a project of this nature. What is on the books in real property tax law is a uniform percent of value. So what you're doing through this project and undertaking this project is that you're making it parcel specific. And the first phase of any reassessment project is the data validation and verification phase. So I could speak to your question is, we can't force our way into anyone's home. Unfortunately, this is the process. We do have resources in regards to permits, realtors, things of that nature. And everything that we do, regardless of the values, is predicated on sales. That's the basis for developing a value. So, what Matt was describing in the valuation component is breaking the city down into neighborhoods and then looking at arm's length transactions, valid sales within that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And that's the basis for developing a value for the non-sales. But we're going to look at everybody specifically, parcel specific, and instead of taking this equalization rate that's essentially an average of an average, because it's a random sample of sales.
Right.
Certain part of the city, residentially, commercially, vacant. And then what they do is the state of New York, Office of Real Property Tax Services, they develop what's called an equalization rate. And that's where they apply that uniform percent of value towards everybody. Now, back to your question, part of the project in the verification phase is to get the inventory correct, because like sales, the basis in the information is going to be is really the foundation of developing the value.
Right.
Now, throughout the entire project, and this is prudent, it doesn't matter anywhere, but to be transparent, right? So inform property owners, your constituents, property owners, what's going to happen, timing. It can get confusing with equalization rates, but whatever we collect in regards to the inventory, before we look at a sale, before we look at a value, before we look at neighborhoods, we're going to say, okay, this is what we've collected on your property. Is this accurate? And then if there is a discrepancy, there's something that's incorrect, again, this is the system. This is what we're tasked to do, is do it from the exterior because it's mass appraisal. We'll make those corrections. We'll use some of the resources that are available to sort of indicate the condition and the grades, of properties. But everybody, it'll be comprehensive in the nature that everybody's going to essentially, their information is going to be validated or verified.
That touches on an interesting point because we see, 8,000 people probably come to our counter every year. Decent chunk of the home ownership in the city. This opens the door to a lot more. And all of us, I think, are about civic engagement. But assessment in particular, I think, works best if people know what we're doing, because it's confusing as heck, right, for those who sat on the RFP committee. But really important because there are a few things other than maybe sanitation and potholes that people care about more than the property taxes, and this directly affects it. It doesn't determine property taxes, but it is the foundation for which the taxes are levied. And so any opportunity we have to reach a chunk of the population who isn't already coming and applying for disabilities, senior citizens, flood exemptions, this is a nice door open to do so.
So let me ask you this question. We have a lot of renters in Syracuse. So those homes that are rented, do you go to the landlord, or can the renter be that conduit for you to go and do the assessment? Can they approve to be for the process, I guess, is the question.
Dave, that is a good question. Do you prefer to get information from tenants or from owners? In
you?
some
I
cases,
mean-
owners have never laid eyes on their properties, so I trust that tenants can be credible messengers.
That's a good question. Yeah, typically we'll go to the owner of record, so the landlord and the property owner, and then from there, if we do have to go to the tenant, but typically, if they're the owner of record, that's who will receive all correspondence. That's who we're asking to verify the information because they're the owner.
Yeah, sometimes some of these owners are nowhere to be found. So if that would be the case, will then that property be assessed based on the data that you find around the property?
Correct, from the exterior. Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And what you're describing, I mean, it's important to sort of delineate between commercial property and residential property, and this is what real property law, tax law dictates, is anything 4 units and above is deemed commercial. Anything, a 3-unit and a 2-unit or a single-family residential, that's deemed residential.
Okay.
So even though there's an additional income, it's a multifamily house, once you get to 4 units and above, that's a commercial property.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I'm trying to find a way to say this tactfully, but a $2 million expenditure, multi-year project that's pitched to the council to bring us up to date, right? Seems like we've heard something similar in the past. Do we have the capacity to actually pull this off?
So our org chart and our workflows are continually a work in progress. I think it's no secret the city's facing a retirement wave, but I also know that assessment now is staffed at its highest level, and I think as well balanced as it's been since at least 2017. We've got a wonderful front of house who's training to get up to speed for the support that GAR's going to need, while at the same time running our day-to-day assessment regime, which I think is something that perhaps gets forgotten here, that we process these thousands of exemptions every year, 8,000 permits for physical changes, oiling charges, everything else that goes into assessment behind the scenes. We've also had a tremendous relationship with the Office of Analytics, Performance, and Innovation, who have supported a process enhancement initiative in our shop. I am strongly optimistic that they're going to continue that work in support of this. That said, it's going to take all hands on deck to make sure that this is not a one-off, that we aren't creating 1 year of a perfect assessment role and then watching it slide after that. I know that these contractors tend to offer, a retainer after the fact to support our level of assessment. I don't want to be wholly dependent on that. I think we're jumping into the new normal of desktop review and modeling. We're going to be leaning on the state with their new RPS software when that launches. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Katie.
Matt have you standing up there. Sit right there.
Thanks,
Should
Katie.
have gave me this. Should have gave me the signal.
One of these. Very patient, Dave. Yeah, Counselor, does that begin to answer the question? I mean, this is
So-
something that causes sleepless nights, but that we have devoted a heck of a lot of bandwidth to already, but that this is an enormous amount of money for assessment. Maybe in some parts of city government it isn't, but here this is something we take really seriously, and I recognize that a year ago, 3 years ago, we wouldn't have been prepared for this. And that's part of the reason that I wouldn't say we've slow-rolled this, but we've tried to get our ducks in a row to make sure that we're prepared to take this on responsibly.
I guess, who would the project owner be? Project management? And who's going to be
Project
working
owner,
on it?
I'm afraid that buck stops with me. Project management is not something I believe that should exist at the department leadership level. I don't think I'm necessarily qualified to be that guy, nor in leading the department would I have the bandwidth to be that guy. We've identified two possibilities. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in the context of budget in coming weeks, but since we're here asking for this, go ahead, Counselor.
So with that being said, to also piggyback off of Councilor Williams' question, when you make the point of having all hands on deck, right? Nearly $2 million project here, your time frame would be what amongst approval of everything, and what are the potential hiccups or bumps in the road that we could possibly run into in the near future that would delay the process? We just want to have all eyes in, just like how you have all hands on. We'll have all eyes in from our half just to double check and look in to see, okay, is this going to be feasible? I give kudos to API, give kudos to the state system that everything runs smoothly. But in your case of your experience and your experience, all of our experiences here, the time frame and also the bumps in the road that could potentially put a speed bump or a delay time with getting things done. Typically what happens there.
That is a super question. I think I can begin by saying that data collection, at least, is something that we can outsource. These guys are going to have access to our files, be able to digitize, and be able to press forward sort of concurrently with our doing our normal assessment work this year, preparing for my tentative role on January 1st of 26th on our old data. I think that gives us a little runway in identifying a project manager and really getting our hands dirty with the contractor. After that, we're going to need some level of interdepartmental commitment, I think, and we need to have a project manager identified, somebody who can, I know per the contract, commit 20 hours a week to working directly with GAR, liaising between them and us and any other relevant city business units. IT, communications. I mean, I know GAR would propose to do a lot of the public relations lift, but we've got a terrific comm shop downstairs, and I know we like to do things a certain way. And they should be involved at every step of the process. So that said, as he's got a shade more experience dealing with the day-to-day hiccups in these processes, I'd turn the rest of that question over to Dave.
Yeah, just to Commissioner's last point about any comms, yeah, we have a public relations, intensive public relations campaign. But any communications will go through the city, and we'll verify that. So nothing will be issued, whether it's press release or social media or anything like that. Back to your original point about is this feasible? I think it's important to note that we've been in business for 64 years. We've done projects. We did the original City of Buffalo project in 97, 98. Of all of our projects, they've all been certified at 100%. Not to say there hasn't been challenges along the way, there certainly has. But I think being collaborative with any assessment department or assessment office is paramount to a successful project. I mentioned transparency, so communicating to the public, but also, setting up and scheduling, clear sort of milestones. Typically in any project, it's broken down into 3 phases. We have the data collection validation phase, the valuation phase, and then the 3rd phase, which is the informal review challenging. And that's an opportunity for property owners to view assessments, look at information, be able to challenge their assessment before any formal grievance proceedings, which happen every year. It's no different with the project. But I think our track record and the collaboration with the city's assessment office is, I think, will ensure that any sort of potential obstacles or hiccups, collaborating and also collaborating with the Office of Real Property Tax Services. Ultimately, they are going to certify the roll at 100%. So we have regular meetings with them, status meetings, so that they are aware as the government agency that's monitoring assessment rolls, but certainly assessment equity projects. They'll monitor, and we'll involve them to explain to them, this is what we're doing, this is the timeline, and if there's any sort of deviation to that tentative schedule or schedule that we've set up, we'll make corrective action.
So with the 2 questions, I think you might have just answered it. The time frame on the property owner's grievance, how long do you give them to do that during the process of your evaluation in the last phase?
So this is exciting because Anna and I just spent the bulk of this past month in these 2 seats, and grievance is still a 4-letter word, I think, at this time of year. I mean, it's a wonderful thing, but, we're a little weary of it.
You're excited about it. I didn't think anybody'd be excited about that.
I am adversarial in these positions. GAR would, as part of this, do a round of informal hearings based on their outputs in November and December of the year prior to our releasing the tentative roll on January 1st. In theory, that should weed out a ton of potential challenges. That said, our grievance period usually opens the 17th of January. Filing runs for 2 weeks till the 31st of that month, and then we usually open up grievance hearings the first week of February, and they run in a perfect world through the end of February, but the past couple of years have been bleeding into the first week of March, the first full week of March this past year. We saw about 400 of them this year. I'm afraid conservatively we could see that go up by 250%. I think we've done a heck of a job, as you've noticed, with our bringing some settlements to you, knocking out a lot of the outstanding tax certs, probably in preparation for litigation increasing on the back end of this. That said, we've got a couple of years to get there. We're going to be continuing our day-to-day work as best we can. But there will be a lot of challenges on the backs of this, both because this is going to be, I hope, a highly publicized initiative, and people will just simply notice their assessments, whereas they might not notice a letter signed by me the first week of January, a change notice. But also, there could really be some dramatic changes. And at the time when these happen, people won't have any idea of the relationship between their assessments and their taxes, right? We all know that there's sort of a status quo where our mill rate is 39.3787 or something like that. In theory, if we're underassessed by 30%, our mill rate should be going down a lot, and a lot of people's taxes should be going down by a lot, but we won't know that until the budget season following my signing the roll. And people won't see that on their city school bills until January 1st of that year. So,
And Commissioner, here's a point I think that all of us will have to have conversations with our constituents related to the ultimate question, which is going to be, how are my taxes going to be affected? So will you take what you just said, again, you're talking about a mill rate now. I'm sure that people at home are unfamiliar with the term. Do you want to break it down again and explain the relationship between assessment and taxes and what may or may not happen as a result of this project?
Sure. So this is the math we can all do without the calculator or the pen and paper. And I know, I know the math is sometimes none of our friend. The mill rate is the blended tax rate. That's what is applied against the assessment that we are paying on for the county bills every January 1st, for the city school bills every July 1st. So for every $1,000 of assessed value, if the mill rate is 39 and change, your tax bill would be about $3,900. For a $200,000 house, pushing $8,000. For a $50,000 property, half that, a little under two. Necessarily, unless we're looking to make a ton of revenue on this, and this is not really how assessment is intended to work, the tax rate should go down. We can earn the same amount of revenue, have a similar or slightly higher levy, but if the universe of city properties, taxable properties, are underassessed by 30%, the tax rates should come down a lot, which I think has all sorts of knock-on policy benefits. In the context of housing study work, for instance, if the city becomes more competitive tax-wise than it already is with suburban counterparts, I think that could be a really good thing.
So with that, you have the number, what's the percentage of taxable and untaxable? Just to reiterate that.
So numbers-wise, in terms of the number of properties, it's not huge. We probably have 6,000 exempt properties and 35,000 taxable properties, give or take.
But the most
But in terms of value,
highest assessed value
we're
is
looking at
probably tax
about a
exempt, correct?
52-48 split right now, and we'll have those numbers finalized for our budget hearing on the 9th.
Was that a 52 untaxed, 48 taxed, or is that the other way around?
I think it's 52 taxable and 48 untaxable.
And so then that'll relay back to my previous question to Mr. Barnett. Without breaking client business privileges, the city that could have been similar to us, being in business for 64 years, what was the greatest or biggest hiccup that you ever ran into when it comes to this issue here? As far as the percentages and the rates and things like that, have you ever?
In regards to taxable and non-taxable.
Right, with
yeah, I mean,
everything that you're gonna be doing.
we've worked in communities where that was a similar split.
Okay.
Just come to mind that it's smaller, but the city of Troy, where you had RPI, that was the bulk of it.
I used to live there for college. So
Yeah. So when we did the city of Troy, it was a similar thing. And what the commissioner had mentioned about the pie. So ultimately, the taxable pie is going to get bigger. In other words, and a typical number is a third, and a third.
Okay.
Third goes down, third stays the same, and a third goes up. And that's a general rule of thumb. Where there are some deviations with that is if there's large commercial that's on the taxable, but I think the majority, knowing what we know, the majority is tax exempt or either on pilots.
I think it actually is the other way around. It's 54% is tax exempt, 46 is tax.
That was a similar makeup.
But most cities are like that,
Yeah.
correct? Because most cities had the public buildings and had the universities and all that,
Yeah.
so and hospitals and all that.
that are roll Section 8, which is wholly exempt. And that was the case in the city of Troy.
I can't think of a worse time to do this, to tell you the truth. With senior citizens calling Social Security and being put on hold for 8 hours. I mean, this was going to, this is another thing that government's going to do, they think. It's going to affect their taxes, and they're on fixed income. And I just, with what's happened on the federal level, I appreciate all your efforts because I know you'll do it in a direct and honest way, but it's going to be it's a tough thing right now for a lot of our folks out there.
Yeah, and the optics, I mean, we have to be really sensitive to the optics here. And I know our staff do bend over backward to help anybody who's deserving who comes in. I think it's fortunate that you all passed the local option for the state's expansion of the senior citizen exemption about 2 summers ago. To the extent that we can stay on top of those possibilities at the local level, I'll continue to bring those requests to you all. To the extent that we can share with constituents that these programs are out there. I'm sure we processed, I think, 2,150 senior citizen exemptions on the current roll. So there's meat on the bone there.
I'm curious, not to jump to the end, but I'm curious to hear, given the numbers and given everything that I've been given so far, what is your end goal here at the end of this project, and how is this going to improve the city?
So 100% level of assessment is obviously the easy quantifiable metric. To hold that over a period and really build up our terrific staff in developing within the department and being able to work in-house to model on the back of the new ARPAS and maintain that on our own without outside help would be hugely gratifying to me, and I think a good reflection on what Ann and everybody have been doing for the last many years. This is a little out of my lane, but to see our tax rates the lowest in the county, necessarily because we were so undervalued and were able to bring our values up to par, I think could be a pretty special thing that helps establish us as a city of choice for anybody who does have a choice where to live in this community. And if we can do that while goosing revenue a little bit, I think everybody in the building would be pretty satisfied. That is not raising this levy on the backs of every resident out there, right? Because none of us wants to hear about that.
Right.
Our taxes just are getting too high. 48% of us can't pay to run a municipality for 100% of us.
With the 62 neighborhoods, and how does having institutions like Syracuse University, for instance, in your neighborhood, how does that affect? Does that have any effect at all, having positive things like libraries, schools, parks? Does that affect?
So we redrew the neighborhoods in my first full year here, summer of 21. They're based primarily on sales data.
So it makes it attractive.
Market data. Neighborhood 50 is bounded by Schuyler to the north, West Fayette to the east, the city line to the west, and Burnett Park to the south. So you get a sense of, if you're shopping for a house, you're going to look there. That's where the data shake out. But it's also based on building style, geographic, and infrastructure boundaries. So to the extent that it's enhanced by the existence of an asset like that, is that what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, the sale prices, obviously, and that would affect the taxes. I'm conversely, vacant property, for instance. If a neighborhood has a lot of vacant property that isn't being used, productive use just there, that would be inverse as far as the value of the property.
I think all the literature out there shows that vacants affect.
So we've kicked
sales
around
data
having a
negatively.
vacant property fee for years. And
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
we should.
Independently of this, I'd love to get over the hump there. Obviously, we've got constitutional concerns about a tax, but if there is a vacant property fee that's achievable, I'd like to continue to explore that.
When you get a chance, do you have a map of the identified number of neighborhoods? There's 62. Can I just see a breakdown of how you
It's
do
a big document, but I'll email it to
All
you.
right. Not too much, but I just wanted to take a look at that. Just
He wants to dig deep here in this
It's fun,
stuff. So
man.
email him all the stuff you got.
I mean, for everybody who's been in my office, it's the big one. Or for anybody who's walked by my window, it's the big one on the wall. But yeah, I'll email it to everybody here this afternoon. It's fun.
So how do you choose where to start?
Well, with the reassessment, like the actual nuts and bolts of the reassessment itself, Dave?
Well, I think a press release would be issued first, just announcing the project, communicating to the public certain timelines and things of that nature, and then the first phase of the project would be the data validation and verification, and the tentative schedule that we've set up. I mean, that's probably the most labor-intensive, most time-consuming, is the data collection, verification aspect.
So based on that verification, you choose a neighborhood to be the first.
We would probably, in conjunction with the assessment office, do it somewhat strategically, and territorially. But that would be established to say we start in the north and go to the south. But we would determine it, and then we would announce, this is
I
where
guess
we're.
that's my question.
Yeah,
Then you would announce
yeah.
who's going to be,
Yeah, and I'll be clear with this too, is that there won't necessarily be boots on the ground per se. We will probably take potentially street level photos. So there will be, some staff out in the field, per se, but there won't be someone knocking on each door, type of collection for the most part. And then if there is, or we do have to go into the field at various parts of the project, will be clearly identified. And if it's known what areas we're going to be prior to that, we'll announce that to say we're going.
Some people are ready.
Yeah, yeah. I think the press releases and a public relations, that's really where the project starts, and then territorially we'll establish a data collection route. Yeah.
So most of your data will come from like Google Earth, permits, code violations, realtor listings, and those things.
Yeah, yeah. Just one point of clarification. Google Earth satellite, typically satellite imagery. We have aerial imagery, which actually has top-down photography, but also oblique photography, so that we can see the sides and the back.
Does that show to-date images? I don't know. For some reason, whenever I've heard people use it, there's always like not today. It could have been like
2010.
Yeah,
Yeah.
months ago, 2 years ago,
That depends on the license
and those
you have,
and
right?
places change within those times. I mean, I know because one lady worked in permits at one point in time, and she kept asking me about a sidewalk that had been fixed for like 6 years.
Yeah.
So I'm like, come out to the property and do whatever you need to do, because you keep looking online and I'm trying to tell you that it's not that. So how does that affect that? Like what Counselor Gathers was saying, is that a part of some of the hiccups, not having actually been to a property?
Yeah, it'll be recent imagery. So in other words, a year, maybe even less. We're not gonna rely on imagery from 2010. It's gonna be recent, and then we'll also cross-reference with permits, so that if someone, I have to be clear, it's never going to be real time. I mean, that's the way that this assessment calendar is set up. We are bound to statutory dates. We can't project it to the immediate, today, in the future. But certainly we'll have recent imagery so that we're capturing the correct data. And again, too, at the conclusion of each phase, but at the conclusion of the data verification and validation, property owners are going to have the opportunity to review what we've collected. And it'll be subject to their sort of scrutiny to say, this is what we've collected. Again, before we look at a sale, before we look at a neighborhood, before we look at anything, the intention there is to make sure that we, at least if nothing else, have gotten the inventory correct.
How would the owner be able to do that? Is that something like online, or are you sending them a letter?
To be determined, but there are two options. There is a populated survey that we've mailed out to property owners listing it. Perhaps more efficient way would be a website that we've designed, proprietary to us, where it'll be available, and there'll be an online submission. We recognize that not everybody are internet users, so there will be a paper option, where we can mail that populated survey, but most property owners like the convenience of going online, looking at their data. Even the senior community have gotten.
Will they be able to reply?
Yes, yeah, and they'll be able to submit a inventory change directly to whoever we designate. Typically, it's us, but then we'll triage that and review that, so that as a way to cleanse the inventory and the data for each property.
I'll just add that, possibly in that, getting that information out, working closely with some of the community organizations, because I can only speak for my neighborhood, and that might be a area that would be missed in getting that feedback, because you may not have a lot of people who utilize social media, not social media, but internet surveys or anything like that. So that's just a suggestion.
Yeah, and we're very cognizant of that. So that's why we have these couple, two options. We do recognize that not everybody has, either access to internet or wants to use the internet. So there's always that paper form as well.
So to go along with Councilor Rouser's point, collaborative efforts here to potentially have the boots on the ground effort, could that work? Could that be something that could be done?
I mean, our staff are out there, and to the extent that we could do a better job being out there, I think that's worth exploring. We reassessed the 18th ward this year and maybe saw 2 grievances out of it. That suggests that either people are super satisfied with their assessments or we're not reaching folks. So to the extent that the contractor's doing the desktop review and not out there, and they will be out there for portions of each neighborhood, but we've got to get our staff reachable, visible, and certainly in good communication, building upon the relationships we've got at this table.
And also, I'd just like to say, we currently have a database with inventory. So it's not like GAR's going out and doing the city, excuse me, from the we currently have 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, that type of thing. So when GAR goes, they're going to do their part of it, but they do have a starting point with inventory, that we already have. So that's also, we do have a starting point of, hopefully a lot of our, inventory is correct and our data is correct, but that's where they come in and, double check, use whatever means, necessary to verify codes, permits, online, just to, because a lot of people advertise when something's listed, 4 bedrooms or, remodeled kitchen and, new roof. And unfortunately, we don't, if they didn't take out a permit, we don't know. And I think probably there may be neighbors, once this will say, are going to call us and say, well, they did this and they have that and nobody knows. And I mean, that's just the nature of the beast, I guess. But they do have a starting point.
So just because you said like people doing things that you may not have pulled a permit, this is not going to end up with fines for old work,
No.
correct? Okay.
Absolutely.
No, we're not blowing people into codes as part of the equity update. but that's a legitimate question because stranger things have happened.
So going back to the public notice, I was wondering, should we align a public hearing with the legislation?
Boy, I don't know.
If you you talked about making it a public, doing public notices, So I was just wondering, should we align? Maybe you might want to.
I mean, this is figuratively my first rodeo, but it does seem a little early in the process because there's no there yet. We still have to negotiate a contract, and I hate, in the era of short news cycles, to get a great headline for everybody and then people forget about it in the course of 6 weeks.
Yeah.
To that point, we might want to utilize at some point in this process our community centers, just for maybe
sure.
station somebody. I think a one-on-one rather than having people come down here and, parade and, in a parade here asking stuff that we really don't know anything about. But something when some of your staff members can answer specific questions in those neighborhoods. It's like Seals or Wilson or Magnarelli or Burnett Park or something like that.
This has fallen off in the post-pandemic era, but I know Ann's got a years-long history of heading up to Eastwood off-site and taking any senior citizen who will come in with an exemption. Our staff, probably shouldn't advertise this, but do house
After
visits.
Sunday
But
Mass,
we
I
can
can just point to
Yeah.
Ann if they got problems and stuff like that. St. Pat's.
Yeah.
So there shouldn't be. So you're saying no with any adjustment to the legislation or new legislation that
No,
supports it?
I think we should push forward with this, but we should be sensitive to the idea that we should be proactive and get out. And I think we can probably work with comms to that effect.
How does known future development play into the assessments of a neighborhood per se?
Yeah, I mentioned statutory dates, so we can only report on sales that transferred. Certainly, we're looking at, there may be speculative values. In other words, purchasing of a known development that's going to come into a specific area, market area, or neighborhood. But again, it's everything we do is predicated on sales. So intuitively, we may know that, okay, this area is going to see some development, but until those sales occur, we're kind of handcuffed from an assessment standpoint. And those dates too. I mean, it's important to know the taxable status date, tentative roll date, final roll date. We have to adhere to those, and that's real property tax law. There's really no deviation to that.
Johnson, you good?
Sure, we'll hear more about this from our constituents. And once again, make sure you sit in that third row you sit in all the time, man. Okay, I'll point people towards you.
So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you.
Oh, boy.
This paper?
Was it snowing this morning?
He said he found out Friday. So, yeah.